Hey, so, well, that's a good microphone. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks for coming. It's great to see you all. I'm Kathy Carrick with the St. Helena Historical Society. I'm on the program committee. Oh, really? Oh, rep director, she doesn't know how to do anything else. Anyway, when our program committee got together and we started talking about what we should be doing as the program committee and how we're going to start putting on lectures and programs, we all thought, well, let's start at the beginning. So that's when we had an archaeologist come and talk about unearthing the artifacts from the First Nation. And then we had another guest speaker who was a member of the First Nation from the Wapo tribe, and he talked about baskets. And all through this last year, we've had a lot of speakers talking about the early families that settled in our town, like the Yorks and the Lyons and all these various families. So we've gone through a year of starting with the Indians, the first people, and now we've gotten to a point where we're contemporaries. We're here at the present day. And so we've got with us tonight some very special people. Mike Thompson has been very gracious to say he will come and talk with us, but also one of our members of the board, Steve Taplin. And Mike and Steve went to school together, grew up, were born and raised in this town. And one left town and had a very successful medical career, and now is back growing grapes and making wine. And the other one took off and went to war and came back and then went to school, and then he became a politician, which he's doing also very successfully. So we thought it would be very interesting tonight if we had both Steve and Mike here to talk about growing up in St. Helena. So that's the theme of our program tonight. Thank you. Would you turn your cell phone off, please?
I didn't realize I was going to talk about going out here, but we'll see what happens. We grew up together, so we overlap. So I'm really happy to be here and to have Mike with us. Mike came from a long line in Napa Valley settlers. The Thompsons go way back. There's actually a whole book about the Thompson family written by one of his cousins. It's a wonderful source of information. Our families go back together. The book actually cites his grandmother, Esther, I think that's your grandmother, saying that she was walking down the street in St. Helena and the Taplin sisters were gaping at her. I don't know what was going on, but the families knew stretch back for a while.
And watch those Taplin sisters.
That was my great aunt Moni and great aunt Mabel Anderson, married Oscar Anderson, lived here in town for many years. In the notes, they say that James Thompson came from Ireland in 1796, so we go way back. The family goes way back. And then his grandson, Frank Thompson, came west to St. Helena in 1908. Had a son, Orwell, who's your grandfather. So you're, by my figuring out in this book, your father Charles was his fourth child. And when you add it all up, you're the fourth generation here in Napa Valley. I think that's correct.
I think it's more than that, but you're
Well, let's hear about the others. The Fornis were also, your mother was a Forni. The Fornis are many generations here as well. So there's a lot of history here in Napa Valley, and I wonder if you beginning and talk a little bit about how having all that family and all that history affected your life and your growing up here. And we'll start there.
All right.
And then you can tell us about your first birthday party. Right. Right there. Star. Well, this just establishes that in fact you were here in the beginning. Whereas, but that's you in the center, I think.
In the high chair.
In the high chair behind candles. That's a lot more than one candle. People planning ahead. Gary Morgan's there. Janet Young is there. These are classmates of ours.
Most of them are relatives, Shirley Thompson and Jackie Thompson, Hagendorn brothers. Bruno, the oldest one in the background there. Making sure that I didn't leave any cake.
This was in fact the second picture. There were two birthday parties being featured in the Star this week, in this particular week. The Star was covering a lot of local activity.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to do this. This is fun, and it's really special to be here with Steve. As you were told, we grew up together, and he's someone that I admire a great deal. And what an incredible career he's had in medicine, and then to be able to come back, and it's pretty exciting. And I'm glad you're back in town. So thank you. I look at this picture, and when you said the birthday party, I don't remember this one. Whenever I celebrate a staff person's birthday, we have cake and stuff in the office, and I always ask them, what's the first thing you remember? And I don't remember this. But I do remember a birthday party with some of the same people at the same table, when, and I got a record player. It came in the little square one, you open it up, and you could play 33s, or you could put the fat spindle on and play 45s. And I remember that vividly. We were just talking to someone about the other day, because one of the records I got was Elvis Presley, Jailhouse Rock. Well, yeah, it was great growing up in St. Helena. It was a different town than it is now. And thinking about, someone gave my office some notes, and they said, when you're coming tonight, think about what influenced you in St. Helena being from a pioneer family. And that kind of caught me off guard, because I guess I knew it, but I really never thought about being from a pioneer family. And I called my brother today, who he lives in San Francisco. I called him at work, and I told him what I was doing, and I said, did you ever consider being from a pioneer family? And he laughed. He said, no. He said, I never did either. So that kind of got me thinking about what we're going to do tonight, and how it is I came through all this, not knowing or not thinking that I was from a pioneer family. But it is true. The Thompsons, the Fornis, or the Thompsons and the Palmers and the Youngs have been around here forever. On the Italian side of my family, my mother's side, that was a little newer. My grandmother was first generation American. My grandfather, her husband, my mother's father, was born in Italy and came over to California. And from a little village, who remembers the Ravelli family that lived up on Pine? And I used to walk with my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, at Christmas time. She'd always walk over and have me go to the Ravelli family, and they'd do a little Christmas Eve thing. And it wasn't until the 90s when I went back to my grandfather's village in the hills of northern Italy, and walked through the cemetery and read the headstones. My grandfather was a Forni, and he'd read the headstones, Forni, Ravelli, Ravelli, Forni, Ravelli, Forni. And so it kind of, everybody was gone by then, so I couldn't ask those questions. but I think it explains, not dissimilar to immigrants today, they generally land in the same area. And then, interestingly, Jerry Smith, another one of our classmates, he's married to a Borelli. So there he is right there. Perfect timing, Jerry.
I didn't want to have to say anything, but I'll keep it here.
It's humorous because I told you about that trip going back. I pulled into the gas station, the Exxon station in town. For those of us who've been here a while, Eddie's Mexico, and I was getting gas in Cherry Creek, and we were talking about what we were doing for the holidays. And I said, I'm going to Italy, to my grandfather's village. And he said, oh, where is that? I said, Ronco, Italy. He said, no, but that's where my wife's family's from. And I said, you gotta be kidding. He reaches into the truck and takes out a package. He was on his way to the post office to mail Christmas gifts, and there it was, somebody Borelli, Ronco, Italy. So I think it all kind of explained, as I said, not dissimilar to what we see today. But I had a lot more to do with my mother's side of the family. I was closer to them than my father's side of the family. But that may be why I thought of myself more immigrant than historic Napa Valley. But growing up here was great. As I said, it's changed a lot. There's a lot more people here today than it was. But I think there are a lot of similarities. Someone told me, I was at a USDA program over in Winters at junior high school last week, and the Assistant Secretary of Agriculture was there. She grew up in that town. She went to that school. Her mother's a teacher at that school, and we were announcing this program, and she said, "We're going to Winters." She said, "That's my mother, but I had 100 mothers." And it's pretty similar to what we had growing up. You had to watch yourself because if you did something before you got home, chances are somebody called, and your mother knew. But I was thinking about that pioneer family question, Steve, and a lot of life is connections. Who you meet, who you network with, who you know. And I was thinking about one of the more famous people in that pioneer lineage, and that was my uncle Lowell Palmer, who was forever the judge in St. Helena. And I remember getting a speeding ticket, and I wasn't an adult, I was 16 or 17, and I had been paid by a guy who worked at the Chevrolet garage, which is now the winery next to BMW, that to follow him to San Francisco so he could deliver a car that he sold, and then he would drive me back. I made $20. And on the way down, we both got tickets. Same cop, both over and lit us both up. He was an adult. It would happen in Napa. He went to court in Napa. And he made this case, and the case was thrown out. When I was a kid, so I had to go in front of Uncle Lowell. But Al Shalini, Patty Gasconi's brother, was the person who was the car salesperson. And he said, I'm coming to court with you, and I'll explain to the judge what happened and why you weren't guilty, and there'd be no problem. So the judge asked me what happened. I told him, I explained it. I was with Mr. Shalini. The judge called him up, asked him what happened. He explained that the judge in Napa had thrown the case out because clearly he couldn't have been speeding because he was driving a Cadillac, and Cadillac speedometers aren't wrong. And judge, because and so the judge pondered it for a second, hit his gavel, and he said, okay, here's the deal. I'm throwing it out, but because you're my nephew, I don't want people to think that I'm giving you favorable treatment. So you're innocent of all charges. You'll go 1 week to traffic school and pay a $20 court post. It cuts both ways. when we were kids, I'm sure Steve and Jerry probably have similar stories, but it was really easy to work. It was the thing I remember about St. Helena. If you were a business person in St. Helena, it was almost obligatory that you teach kids how to work. And you just had a job. I know I worked at Brown's Auto Parts, I worked at one of the gas stations, I worked at the Napa Milling, but I started my work like every kid in the town, mowing lawns, raking leaves, picking prunes. And I remember, we moved and lived in Rutherford for a while, and I remember walking up to the old Oaken Bucket. Remember that Mary Martin and Amanda Martin had that little restaurant on the corner? And Bob Kay, who owned the Napa Milling, would have lunch there every day. And I'd walk from my house up to the old Oaken Bucket and wait for Mr. Kay to come out to beg him for a job. So, the prunes aren't ready yet, the prunes aren't ready yet. And finally, the prunes were ready, I was hired, and I made 25 cents a bucket. And then when you got a little bigger, maybe the next year, it was 50 cents a box. And that, that was big money. You could have spending money and do things that you otherwise couldn't do. I had a paper route when I was a kid, and those connections came in handy again because there was a deal in St. Helena, and Mike, were you a paper guy? No? You may remember that the Napa Register was the prominent paper, other than the St. Helena Star. But the Napa Register, in order to get a paper route for the Napa Register, you had to, I guess, marry into the publisher's family, or someone had to die and will it to you, because they were very, very popular, and you just couldn't get them. So I was pretty entrepreneurial, and I somehow was able to get a paper route delivering 3 different papers: the Sacramento Bee, the Oakland Tribune, and the News Call Bulletin. And I think the Bee is probably the only one of those that's still around. But it was a very small distribution. There was only a very light paper bag worth of customers. So I went to that Rolodex and called everybody, knocked on every door of everyone I knew in St. Helena in order to build that up, because they gave you a bonus. They gave you $1.25 or something for every subscription that you sold, and I built it up to be quite a paper route. And then I handed it off to another one of our classmates, Cisco Ramirez. Remember Cisco? And then he took over the round. But St. Helena was a delightful place. There were more prunes than there were grapes. There were dairies back then. A lot of people had cows, and the grapes were just the grapes were always here, but they were never really as prominent. They were not as prominent as they are now.
How about your school experience? How was your school experience here? How has that affected lots of education?
Those are one of the questions he asked. How did your school time in school in St. Helena? How does it cause you to act in regard to education policy? So here's the story on my education. I was not a good student in school, and as a matter of fact, after my last basketball season, I dropped out of high school. So I was a high school dropout, and I went to Santa Rosa College. I tell kids this all the time. I speak to a lot of high schools, a lot of high school kids, and I tell them the story. I said, listen, when I was in high school, I was smarter than all the teachers. I was smarter than my parents. I was smarter than all the other adults. So I left, and I went over to Santa Rosa Junior College, and I took 2 classes over there, and I was smarter than the professors at Santa Rosa College as well. So it didn't take very long before I was in the service, and it was probably. I I don't think I'd even gotten off the bus at Fort Lewis, Washington, when I realized that my parents and all those adults were a lot smarter than I'd given them credit. So I served in the military. I served, I went to Fort Benning, to infantry school, and to jump school. I was a paratrooper, and then I went to Vietnam. I do a lot with students. I have a student leadership council that I do every year for high school kids. I visit schools often, and I think it's because I recognize, and it may have taken a while, but I recognize how important education is in your life, and it just provides a lot more opportunity than if you don't have one. So I promote it a lot, and I push it a lot, and I think it's because of my personal experience and my foolishness growing up that I'm a big proponent of the best education we can do.
So the committees you work on the Ways and Means.
Correct.
So what about growing up here got you interested in money?
Maybe that paper route, I don't know. You know, my degrees are in economics and public administration, so I've always been interested in it. You know, I think it's probably the, remember the line in the Tom Wolfe book, The Right Stuff? When they were having the fight, the astronauts were having the fight, they wanted a window, and the government didn't want a window, and the astronauts rebelled. They said, we're getting a window, we're not going to be astronauts, we're pulling out. And the Tom Wolfe line was, remember, no bucks, no Buck Rogers. And the truth is, it's all about the money. And you can't do anything in regard to public policy without funding. It doesn't matter if it's schools, if it's highways, whatever it is, healthcare. So I think I always recognized that. When I was in the state senate, when I was first elected, I had two choices. I was given the opportunity to chair a policy committee, and they gave me the choice of two. And remember, I'm like at the time, I was like the first new guy in the state senate in 700 years. It was me and everybody else who were like 900 years old. And so the committee assignments they gave me, choices, they said you can chair the housing committee or the veterans committee. And I was equally qualified for both. I owned a house and I was a veteran. And that's about the extent of my policy understanding and knowledge in those areas. And I took housing, and I was just there for a very short period of time. And I moved up to chair the Natural Resources Committee and then the Revenue and Taxation Committee. And I was there for just a short period of time. And I was also on the Budget Committee, and I chaired a subcommittee on Health and Human Services with the Budget Committee. And that was just really interesting. And my subcommittee did mental health, developmental disability, the Veterans Home down in Yountville. It was just really exciting and really, you know, really was important to the lives of a lot of people. And so I then left the Natural Resources Committee to chair the full Budget Committee. And right after that, I got the assignment to chair a committee that at the time I didn't know existed. It was called the Joint Legislative Budget Committee. And I said, well, what is it? And they said, oh, it's a great committee. Nobody knows what it is. They said, what it does is it spends all the after-budget money that comes from the federal government. So after we do a budget, any federal funds that would come in, there was a process that you had to do. You had to work with the Legislative Analyst's Office, determine how that money should be spent, where it should be spent. You would write a letter to the Legislative Analyst, and at the time she would either approve it or disapprove it. And that was it. We had one hearing the entire time that I chaired that committee, and it had incredible clout in the committee. So when I went to Congress, I went on the Budget Committee right away and found out really quickly that it's just not the same. I did more public policy when I chaired the budget committee in different policy areas than the chairs of those committees did, because you'd be able to use the power of the purse to be able to influence policy. Federal government's much different. You know, the budget committee, they argue about and establish guidelines of where money should be spent, but that's not. It is not nearly as influential as the state budget committee. And I started out on the Armed Services Committee and the Ag Committee. I gave up my seat on the Ag Committee to a new member of Congress who was elected in a special election, who was from South Dakota, who really needed to be on the Ag Committee. And the truth of the matter was, federal ag policy at the time had very little to do with the Napa Valley. And at the time, you know, my district was Napa, Sonoma, Lake, Mendocino, Humboldt, and Del Norte. So forestry stuff and fishery stuff didn't go through ag. It went through interior. And we have specialty crops in Napa and Sonoma and Lake County, so there was very little policy at the federal level that dealt with ag. And later, a group of us worked to establish agricultural titles that were really important to our area. One in organic farming and one in specialty farming, and that includes grapes. So that was that changed. That was that came afterwards. And I knew that I wanted to be on a committee that had a lot more influence than most of the other committees. And the way it's broken up, there's a number of policy committees, and then there are a couple of them that are designated as significant committees. And if you serve on those, you only serve on one. And the Ways and Means Committee, that's the one. That's in the Constitution. It pays for everything. You know, if you don't, no bucks, no buck Rogers. And so if somebody wants to do something, you got to figure out how to pay for it. And that's where I wanted to be. And that's where I ended up.
There's a great quote in here from Miriam Hansen, who's here somewhere, and has done a lot of digging and helping. That's a great quote. It says, Mike was asked what he did on Halloween. He replied, with 3 boxes of tomatoes and 8 flats of eggs, what could I do? So tell us about how that influenced your later life, growing up here in
Well, somebody asked me just the other day, they said, where did you go, when you were a kid, where did you go trick-or-treating? And the answer was, when we were little kids, we'd go to Dr. Wood's house because he gave away the full-size Hershey bars. and anybody else, I can't remember any other place that I trick-or-treated. That was, you wanted to get there, you wanted to get there early. And as we got older, well, you guys did it too. We had egg fights, and we had tomato fights, and we had egg stuff, and I'm glad they don't do that. They don't do that. And I know that on Halloween, Monday evening, I took my 3 garbage cans out, put them on the side of the gutter there, and I thought, I guess it's safe. When we were kids, I don't know how safe it would have been, but it worked out fine. The big difference between St. Helena and St. Helena today regarding Halloween is you can't go through the alley anymore. Remember the alley from the ballpark that went out at Aldovandio's house? Next to the big Mooney house with the shingles? Used to go through it all the time, and now that's closed off.
Tell us a little more about when you were growing up, the average person wouldn't have figured that you were going to head to Congress after. Because you were like everybody else. You were going wild, doing things, playing football, doing stuff.
Well, I never thought I would go to Congress either. I never thought I would go to the state legislature. Being in elected office had no appeal to me. As I said, I went to Chico, transferred up there from Napa College, finished my undergraduate degree. Jan, my wife, most of you love me, she came out from Illinois. She's from the Chicago suburbs, and she had come out to Napa. She was a pre-med student at Indiana, and she and a girlfriend came out to visit California. And she got here, and she said, "I'm not going back." And so she tried to enroll in school, and the out-of-state tuition was a deal breaker for her. So she needed to work until she established residency. And she's pretty entrepreneurial also. She went to Napa Beauty College and learned how to cut hair and opened a haircutting shop in Yountville. And she was going to wait till she got her residency, then go back to school. And we met, and I went in for a haircut one day. As I've told some of you before, it was the last time I've ever paid for a haircut. But so Jan was the influence. You know, she said I was working for Behringer, and Jan said, "Hey, let's go back to school." And as I said, I was going to Napa College part-time, and I loved education, and finally something clicked. And so we did. We went to Chico. So I finished my undergraduate, finished my high school degree, was in graduate school, and I taught at Chico part-time. And I had a professor who said, "There's a great program in the California legislature. It's a fellowship program." And they picked, I think it was 12 at the time, and they picked 12 people to do a one-year fellowship in the state legislature. And I think you should apply. And so I did. And he said, "You should also apply for the Senate fellowship." They had the same deal. So I did. And I was accepted. It was very competitive. There was a ton of people that applied for this. And for whatever reason, I was accepted to both. And I picked the Assembly Fellowship program. And that's probably the most I've ever done in education, because they gave you a list of everybody who wanted a fellow. And I thought, this is an opportunity. Some Democrats, Republicans, hold a big list. And I said, I want to meet all these guys, and find out, what I want to do and how I want to. So I interviewed just about everybody on the list. And one day I met this guy who was the principal consultant, chief consultant for the Assembly Education Committee. And we were talking, and I was telling him what I did and where I had interviewed. And he said, "Well, where are you thinking?" I said, "I'm not sure. I think maybe this guy, maybe that guy." And he said, "How about coming with me?" And the way the program worked was, it was a one-year program. You did 6 months in the personal office, and then you did 6 months on a committee staff. And he said, come on. He said, you work in the Assembly Education Committee. So we're rewriting all the education laws, and he said, you'd be great. So I did. I said, well, Teresa Hughes from LA was the chair. And I said, well, when do I interview with the chairwoman? And he said, we're going to skip that. He said, just kind of keep this between us. And it turned out that she had a staffer once who ran against her or something. So she didn't want to bring anybody she didn't know on. So Jim Turner hired me, and I spent the entire year as a fellow on the Education Committee. I did some work for her organizing town hall meetings and committee hearings around the state, but predominantly as a committee staffer. And then the chairman of the Rules Committee had called me in, and he had a job opening. and he called me into his office and offered me the job. And it was really funny. I had about a month left to go on my fellowship, and he was a rough guy. He was known. Lou Taplin was his name. He was a former FBI agent, real tough guy. And he said, "Okay, I want you to go to work. I'll be in my office Monday at 9 o'clock." And I said, "Well, I told him I wanted the job." And I said, "Well, I can't." He said, "What do you mean you can't?" I said, "I'm in the Assembly Fellowship Program. I have a month and a half or whatever it was left." And no one ever told Lou Taplin that. And he was just shocked. And he just stared at me for a minute. And he goes, "Wait a minute, I'm in charge of the Assembly Fellowship Program. You're fired. Be in my office." So I went to work for him, and I was his district assistant in Millbrae, where his district office was, or in Daly City. And we moved down there. We moved down there for a while. And I think it was there 9 months. And he said, "You're going back to Sacramento, you're being the chief of staff." And so I did that. And he left office. And I worked for another member of the Assembly for a little bit. And then some folks came to me and asked if I would run for the state senate in this district. And it worked. It made good sense. I had a lot of credibility in Butte County. The district at the time, that Senate district, was Sonoma, Napa, Lake, Colusa, Glen, Butte, and Tehama, and Shasta. It was a massive district, a Republican district, and I ran in that district, and I won. And 2 years, not even 2 years, it was a year and a couple of months after, that's where I met Brad Honorado, my agent, one of you guys know. I hired him to run the Shasta office. Brad moved to Reading to run that office. And it was about a year and a half, I guess. They did redistricting in the legislature. And you know the drill on redistricting. Every 10 years they do a census, and then they redraw all the lines. Well, the Democrats, they thought they were pretty smart. They said, "We're going to do 2 maps. One that's going to be good for Democrats, and one that is going to be absolutely rotten for the Republicans." So we'll send both of those bills to the governor, and he's obviously going to go for the one that's not rotten to the Republicans. Pete Wilson was the governor, and he vetoed both of them. So that meant that a 3-judge panel would draw the lines. Now, imagine this. I'm 40 years old. I just beat the Republican leader of the state Senate in a district that was drawn for him. And the reason that district was drawn for him is because 10 years earlier, he threatened to run against the Democratic leader of the Senate if they didn't give him a favorable district, a guy named Barry Keene, who represented the North Coast District. So this 3-judge panel takes St. Helena, takes Napa County, Lake County, out of this district that I just won, and puts it right into Barry Keene's district. So now I've got to make up my mind. Do I leave St. Helena and leave this Pioneer family? And so I had to move into Barry Keene's district, because as soon as that map came out, he quit effective immediately. So I had to move into his district and run in that Senate seat. So and it was a tough one. It was a special election right between Christmas and New Year's, and nobody votes. And so I won that election, and I represented a district that was Lake, Napa, Vallejo, most of Sonoma, Mendocino, Humboldt, Del Norte for 6 years. And at the end of the time, it was the same deal. I had no intention of going to Congress. I was going to, just be a pioneer person in town. And, but folks in the district said, no, you need to run for this congressional seat. So I did. Never grew up wanting to, never had any desire to, it just
did it.
just happened.
Well, this was a small town back then, but you expanded your reach from living in a little small town to representing multiple districts to going on to Congress to DC. Talk a little bit about the challenge of growing up in a little town and becoming a mover in Congress.
Well, St. Louis is my home, and it always will be. I come home every weekend. When we have district work periods, I'm generally home. There was a period, I was on the intelligence committee for 8 years, and I would split my district work period. So one district work period, I would go to some exotic foreign country where there was a war going on, and the next one I'd come home and work, so I would rotate them. But I come home every weekend, and I'm here during the district work periods, so I'm pretty grounded here at home. You know, and I have a wife that makes sure that I'm grounded. As I just told you, I was taking out the garbage on Monday, and so it's a regular life for me. I don't do anything differently. There's you know, there's I guess a bit of the wow factor. Figure, you know, doing public policy that affects the lives of millions of people. I can tell you that the best thing about the job still is when you're able to help somebody, and you know, it's not the headline that you get. And most of the time, when you help somebody who really needs help, there's no glory to that. There's no headline, or there's no press release on it. But you know, I had a veteran here a while back that had lived on the street for 10 years, and it all was because of him not being able to get health care. And we got him health care, got his own house now, he's got a better job. You know, things like that are pretty great. Had a woman who had an elected official in Lake County call me one day, and she said, we own a rental house, and we have a tenant who's an older woman, and she's not good on the rent. Sometimes there's half of it, sometimes there's a quarter of it. And she said that Social Security is not paying her what they're supposed to pay her. She said, and she's not in our district. She said it's a rental house over, I think it was over in Colusa County. And said her congressman looked into it and said, no, she's getting everything she deserves. And I said, well, take a look at it. And they've been underpaying her. She got a check for $90,000. So that's cool when you can help somebody. Or one day, sometimes I pick up my own phone. My staff yells at me when I do it, but sometimes I'll be at the office and the phone runs to pick it up. And we had done a mailer out to the district that said what your congressman can do for you. You know, if you need a flag from the Capitol, if your Social Security is late, if your veterans benefits aren't how they should be, you know, the whole list of stuff. And I picked up the phone and answered it, and there was a rather curt woman on the other end. And she said, hey, I got this flyer, and I want to know if this is, and she didn't use the initials. She said, I don't know if this is BS or you're really here to help. And I said, well, if we can, we will. You know, what's the story? And she said, my husband was retired from the Air Force. We lived outside of Travis. That was his last duty station, and he died. And they're not giving me my benefits. And I said, well, let me look into it. She said, you better look quickly, because everything I own is in boxes, and the moving van's coming in 2 days because they're foreclosing on my house. And we looked into it, and sure enough, we got her benefits and all the back pay that she was owed, and she was able to keep her house. So that sort of stuff is, there's, as I say, there's no headlines to that. It's just being able to help people. And my feeling is when someone calls their representative, they're pretty much, most of the time, they're pretty much have run out of options. You know, we have the frequent flyers that call daily about stuff. But more often than not, when somebody calls, you know, they've got an issue and they need help.
Questions from the audience. I could go on quite a while. What others might want to ask any questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
So you mentioned that there was a wow factor when you went to DC. I can imagine that the air there was kind of rarefied. Can you talk about how that was?
I'm not in the Senate. You know, the hierarchy is, you know, the most important people in Congress are Senate staffers. And then you've got 100 senators, all of whom think they should be the president of the United States.
Oh, that's true.
And that's kind of a joke. It's a little bit of an exaggeration. But the Senate is a little more rarefied than...
Well, DC is pretty heady. I mean,
pardon me?
DC itself is pretty heady.
It probably can be, but I think being from St. Helena, as I said, I think it grounds me. I think my military service probably grounds me as well. So I've done things that a lot of the people that you see daily on the talking head shows have never thought about doing. And so I think I have a little different perspective.
What do you think is going to happen with the wine industry? Do you think the future for the wine industry, are they taking steps?
That's a question for Steve.
I mean, is that something that's, I mean, it's agriculture in general, but you're not on the ag committee now.
But you are on the wine
caucus. Yeah, I started the wine caucus. Well, I can tell you that agriculture is having a tough time right now. You know, climate change, we're in the middle of drought. It's really changing the way agriculture operates. In California, this doesn't affect the wine community so much, but California ag is really hurting right now because of our inability to export product overseas. The ports are pretty clogged up. There's a monopoly on the international shippers, and international shippers can make more money bringing loaded Connex boxes to California and turning around and going home empty and picking up the next load. So we import way more, I believe, than we should. And I don't think there are good checks and balances on these shippers. The whole the global pandemic it disrupted our supply chain, and we're seeing all kinds of signs of problems in the shipping world having to do with that. We didn't do well in regard to managing the during and after pandemic management of product. So there's I had a hearing at the Port of Oakland just this week, and they have more full Connex boxes than they've ever had before, for two reasons. One, they depend on like it's a trailer, they call it chassis to move these things. They don't have enough of them. The owners of the chassis company didn't keep up with the maintenance, so we saw a couple hundred of them that were in line for repair, and they're not able to repair them quickly enough in part because they can't get parts. But there's a ton of product that's sitting at the port because there's no place to put it. The retailers have they didn't manage the ordering and the distribution well, so their warehouse capacity is full. So this is an annex warehouse for them, and it's a real mess. And it's going to be a while before that straightens out. But in the meantime, we feed the world with our agriculture. California is the breadbasket of the world, and we can't get our product to customers in other countries. And it's bad when nut growers, primarily walnuts, almonds, and pistachios, are trucking their nuts to Houston, to Louisiana, and to Norfolk, Virginia, in order to get it to their customers in other countries. So we've got port capacity problems, we've got all all the things that I just mentioned that are impacting that. And on the ag side, we've got, we have other challenges. We've, the wine community got hammered with the smoke from all the fires that we had. We've got wineries that just don't have any vintages because the grapes were so bad that they couldn't use them to make wine. We have fertilizer problems because, as you may or may not know, we get a majority of our fertilizer from Ukraine. And you know what's happening there. That's choked off. And there's probably, we could probably source some of that from here, but there aren't a lot of railroad companies that are willing to go out and build 5,000 new cars, or whatever they have to build, to help us get through this little rough patch. So, because as soon as things clear up, we're going to be back to getting it from Ukraine. So, we've got a bunch of challenges. There's no question about that. And then you always have to deal with consumers and what are consumers drinking, or I guess worse, what aren't they drinking? And that's probably an ongoing balancing act.
Harry.
You were with the
I can't hear.
You were with the airborne in Vietnam.
Yes.
Could you talk some more about your experience in Vietnam and also about the Saint-Helenians who were killed there?
Well, I guess that we all know, all of us who grew up here knew all of our classmates who didn't come back, and their names are engraved on a wall out at the cemetery. And it was a very, very sad situation. If you go out on Memorial Day or Veterans Day, you're reminded of that. We all can tell stories of watching Gary Rodriguez do incredible things on the football field, and there was a number of them that didn't make it back, and something that we'll always remember and always be sad about. I had a pretty normal, I guess, deployment. I went to Vietnam, and I was there in 1969 and late 68, 69, and I was a staff sergeant when I went to Vietnam. I had gone to the NCO Academy at Fort Benning, and when I got to my unit in the field, we had a lieutenant who was there for about a week and a half and left, and I was the highest ranking guy and with the least amount of experience. So I became the platoon leader in that unit. And I had great guys in my platoon who helped a lot. And as I said, I was there. I was in country. I was in the field for a little over 6 months, and I was wounded and came home. And came home to Travis Air Force Base. Bill, you know that well. And it was the humorous side of that trip. I came to Travis, and they keep you there for a few hours, and then they put me and a number of other guys on a bus. And it was the short bus, with the extended engine in the front, and they had stretchers, and they had, I think, 3 of them, maybe 4 of them, probably 3 deep on each side. And I was on the top stretcher, and I was about 3 runs back. And I could see about this much out of the window if I looked. And they transported me to Letterman General Hospital that was in San Francisco, no longer there. And I got there and there was a protest. And they started shaking the bus. And the bus was going from side to side. Oh, I go through all of this. And I'm going to die in a roll of racks in the streets of San Francisco. And then when I recuperated, I had a few surgeries and got back on my feet. Typical Army, probably typical military. I was in my bed at Letterman, and somebody, captain or something, came in, and he said, okay, you've got so many months left. Where do you want to go? So, because you were wounded in combat, you get preference. You can go to any duty station you want. And I said, I want to stay right here, Presidio. He said, okay, Presidio. And he said, just in case, you know, it doesn't work, what's your second choice? And I said, you know, Fort Ord. And he said, okay, Fort Ord. And within minutes, they came back with my orders for Fort Benning, Georgia. And so then they send everybody, you know, to one place, and they process you in, and then they start figuring out what you're going to do for the rest of your time. And there was a unit at Fort Benning, I think it was the 187th, 197, and they did a couple of things. They did guard duty, they did KP, and they were the aggressors for the infantry school. They were the guys that went out and played the bad guy. And it was terrible morale. So I said, I don't want to go there. And some sergeant said, well, you better go find yourself a job then, because that's where you're going if you don't come up with a better job. So I went back to the NCO Academy, and there was a colonel there who was in charge of the academy, who remembered me. I was an honor graduate from my unit where I trained, and he remembered me, and he said, yeah, you can be a tactical NCO. You can come to work. And I went back to the unit, the barracks where I was staying. I was jazzed. So I got a job at the infantry school, the NCO Academy, and there was a guy there, and he said, aren't you airborne qualified? I said, I am. Well, he said, why would you do that? He said, they need instructors in airborne school. I said, well, I only had 5 jumps. And they said, they pay $55 a month extra. Hazard duty pay. I said, I'm an airborne instructing for So the next day I went to the airborne school, and they hired me. And so I spent the rest of the time as an instructor in the airborne school, getting more. I have over 100 jumps, and the last one was in Tucson, Arizona. It was a high altitude jump strapped onto a Navy SEAL. And you all know the Navy SEAL. He was the one that dispatched Osama bin Laden.
I just follow up on that era. When, as I recall, the Democrats kind of owned the anti-war efforts. As you were choosing your political path, how did your military experience impact that?
Oh, you know, when I was younger, before I went into the military, and probably while I was there, I wasn't a Democrat. So that came afterwards, and probably the military stuff. You know, I had to factor in, as did everything that I went through in my life factored in. I can tell you the biggest influence my military service had on my time in elected office was regarding the invasion of Iraq. And I was a pretty new member of Congress when that issue was up, and some of you may remember this, but I was on as I said, I was on the Armed Services Committee at the time, and we were getting briefed daily from State Department and from the Bush administration. And for the life of me, I didn't understand. I could not get my head around why in the world we would want to go there. And every time we would ask questions, I was never satisfied with the answer. And one day I walked into our Democratic caucus meeting, and 2 members said, we're going to Iraq. We're leaving today. And I said, I want to go. I want to see it for myself. And they said, you can't, this thing's already done, there's no way. You've got to get cleared by Treasury, you've got to get cleared by the State Department. It took us weeks to do this. I ran back to my office and I told my staff, I need this clearance. And I was on the plane. I went back to Iraq. And I got to tell you, being on the ground, talking to people, seeing the conditions in which our men and women were going to be placed, it was just a no-brainer. There was just no way we should have gone into Iraq. And I voted against the bill and to go. And it was interesting. I was called all kinds of unflattering names. They talked about my mother. You name it. I heard about it. But as we all know now, we should not have gone. And the outpouring of support after the fact, I got thousands. We used to do letters back then. And we got thousands of letters in the mail thanking me for doing that. That was a direct result of the time that I spent being sent to a war we shouldn't have been in. And as I said at the time, being in this position is a position of responsibility. And I may very well have to sit down at a parent's dinner table and talk to them about their son or daughter dying in combat. But I want to make sure it's the right, that I cast the right vote, going there or not going there.
The other people that went when you were on the Congress?
They were, and sometimes it's better not to know a lot, because had I known about them, I wouldn't have gone with them. They were terrible, and they made a spectacle of themselves, and they were an embarrassment there. And matter of fact, they held a press conference in that country and spoke out against the President of the United States. And you just don't do that. And I'll tell you, it's interesting because the two guys, as I said, I took some criticism when I came back. The two guys spoke out on my behalf. One was E.J. Dionne, the writer. And there's a great, I wrote an op-ed piece, it was in the Washington Post, and they juxtaposed it next to his. And he pretty much said, I know those other guys, and had I known Mike, I'd have told him not to go with them. But he said, they went there to cause a spectacle. Mike is a Vietnam veteran, wounded in combat. He went to find out what was going on. And it was a glowing editorial. Probably the nicest thing that anyone has ever said about me in political context.
Did you have a view on Vietnam when you went there?
Pardon me?
Did you have a view on the Vietnam War?
Yeah, but it wasn't based on a lot of thought and knowledge. But and the other one was Chuck Hagel. I don't know if you remember Chuck Hagel. Was a Republican senator from Nebraska, a Vietnam veteran. He too was a staff sergeant in Vietnam, and he was asked on national television. They said, "Hey, this guy Thompson over in the House went to Vietnam. What do you think about that?" And he said, "Well, I'm very proud of him for going." He said, as a member of Congress, he has not only a right to do that, but he has a responsibility to do it." And it just took the edge off all of the criticism.
Isn't that?
So when you were telling the story of leaving high school, you said after basketball season you left high school, which tells us
there's
that,
priorities.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about sports in high school, and also I know for years and years, Helena's league has always extended as far north as Fort Bragg. So I wondered if you ended up playing against.
If you, I don't know if anybody remembers, but if you've read about it or heard about it, St. Helena High School, Mike remembers, he was there. St. Helena High School was a powerhouse in sports. And we had that incredible winning streak in football, 63 games, I think it was, under Coach George Davis. Well, our class was the antithesis. We went from great powerhouse to pretty much downhill. I remember my first year in basketball, I think we went, our first year I think we did well. I think we only lost 1 or 2 games. It was second year we only won 1 or 2 games. But it wasn't the same back then as the glory years of St. Helena High School. I do a deal, we don't do it anymore because people are getting a little old, but up until just a couple of years ago, I would go for 3 days up to Mendocino County with 2 people that I know these guys know, Walt Raymond, who had Raymond Vineyard, and Tom Blanchfield, and they were like the football machine and baseball and basketball too. And we go up and do a thing out in the woods, wildlife adventure, put it that way. And one day we came around the corner and we turned right into a pack of feral pigs, wild pigs. And Blanchfield said, "Let's catch them." And they aren't the same as they were when they were in playing football for the days. But we tried.
Yes, hey Mike, is there any hope that politicians might work across the aisle? It seems like it's pretty wide country, and
Can we talk about that?
No,
oh, we're not.
Yeah.
Oh,
about which?
Politics. About politics working across.
We're a non-political organization, a 501c3, so we have to respect that, I think.
Can I say that I'm all for that? Can I say that, and if I can't, you can expunge it, I guess. But you know, they do every year. They do a ranking of members of the House as to how bipartisan they are. And every year that they've done that, I have been either number 1 or number 2 most bipartisan California member of Congress, both sides of the aisle, number 30 or 31 of all 435 members of Congress. So I think it's important to work to solve problems.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about growing up here. This was a pretty conservative town when you were a kid. You ended up being a Democrat. You fought the war. How does growing up in a Republican community help you be a bipartisan person?
Well, it probably helps a lot, you know, because, and if you think about it, the Republicans that we knew growing up weren't about, you know, being wild and crazy. They're about getting stuff done. And I think that's what it's all about, is being able to get things done and to serve the community, the state, and the nation. And there's a lot that needs to be done. So I think that's I think that probably had a good influence on me.
In the back, Miriam.
You spent a lot of time with Roy Raymond as a young man. Would you talk about him, or what was he like?
Well, Roy, that's Walt Raymond's dad, and he was married to Mary Jane Behringer, and I grew up across the street from them. So I've got great stories. Roy pulled, the first tooth I had pulled, baby tooth, Roy pulled it. He's just a great guy and hard worker. The whole Raymond family, you know, arguably they came from a pretty well-off family. You know, they owned Behringer Winery, and but Walt and Royce, the little Roy, the kid. And they worked, you know, they had jobs. They worked in the vineyard, they worked in the winery. They bought their own car. So they were, you know, they were just a regular St. Helena family. And I think that you had mentioned earlier was the job I had working with Roy, keeping score for the different baseball teams that we had. And we had Blue Sox, which was a men's hardball league, and we had, they called it the Old Men's Softball League, and they called it the Girls Softball League, and we had Little League and Pony League and all that stuff. But I used to, I made money as a kid chalking the fields, lining the fields. Mike, you did that too, I think. And you break them out, and water them down, and line the field. We could also make money chasing foul balls. And you get, I think we get
10 cents. 10 cents.
Yeah, you get a dime for a foul ball. And then later, and you know, and that helps me a lot now because I've had the chance, I've had the great honor of throwing out open pitches, the first pitch, and I've done it at the River Cat Stadium. I've done it at Sonoma. There they got an unaffiliated professional team there. Vallejo Admirals, the Napa, the Silverados, they were here for a while. Martinez in the district, they had a team, and I've done it at Candlestick Park. And all but the Candlestick one, I always tell them, I say, you know, I used to make money breaking these fields. I don't want to mess this mountain up. I'll just step down here in the grass. The Candlestick one was a different deal. You know, it was that was the bigs. You know, so you had to throw from the rubber there. But then later on, I kept score for Roy, and he would announce. He announced all those Blue Sox games, and then I kept score for the girls softball and the old men's softball too. But I don't remember if he announced those or not. And then I'd get a couple of bucks extra for doing the batting averages once a month, and I'd bring them down to Star Baldwin, and he'd print them in the paper. I think he gave me $3 for doing that.
Any questions?
So how much time do you spend at Carpy Field, Mike?
Well, you know, as a kid, I spent it there all the time.
Yeah.
And you remember, because you did too. And I told someone the other day that it'd be Saturday morning, and you'd hear it, boom, boom, boom. Somebody would have a basketball. And all of a sudden, it was like the Pied Piper. Everybody was at Carpy Field. Or at the open, you know, the side, it was covered, but the basketball court at the elementary school was open on the sides. And we play ball down there. But another Roy Raymond story, Roy would come over and say, come on, you need to come shag balls. He'd have a 5-gallon bucket of baseballs, and he'd have Blanchfield, and Walter, and Roy, and 2 or 3 other guys, Ray Myers, and he'd throw to them, and they'd have batting practice, and I'd go shag the balls and bring them back. But that was the Carpy Field was where it's at. It was always a baseball game, always a basketball game, always a football game. And when we had Mr. Carpy, who the field was named after, who was just an incredible influence on so many kids. Now, when they had boxing when we started, they kind of ended that.
I remember boxing.
Yeah, they had boxing. I think he had track. He had football, basketball. Tumbling. And that was before. I didn't do tumbling. I didn't do boxing. I don't think I did track with Carpy Gang. I played. Well, they changed. They went to Pony League baseball. It was just Carpy Gang, and then they had Little League and the Pony League. That was junior high, and I was on the Carpy team for that.
We played on the same team, didn't we? The Giants.
You Little League Giants.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
I played with Beltran, and we were on the Red Sox.
Red Sox.
Because we went, a couple of years ago, we went to St. Helena, had us come down because we were part of the first year of.
We were the first Little League team.
Yeah. You know,
I was on the Giants also. But then after you played a couple of years of that, then you moved up to Pony League.
Right.
Doug White was our second baseman.
Yeah.
And
so when we first started playing at Carpy Game, so Al Carpy was our coach, right?
Right.
Then he passed away.
Correct.
after a couple of years, and then Chuck was doing. Okay, so was Carpy Field was named after Al, or was
After
it?
Al. It was named after Al. It was Carpy Field when we were.
Well, it was Carpy Field, and I thought, you know.
So the real trivia question is, you remember Mr. Carpy's dog's name?
I don't remember he had a dog.
He had a black dog, Nipper. Nipper? He left it someplace. He had that old blue pickup. And he left, we played someplace and he left that dog.
Yeah. All I remember is his fumble with that.
Fumble with that. And I remember playing, we had, in Little League, we had, I think, 3 teams in St. Helena and 1 team in Yountville, the Yountville Chiefs.
Yeah.
And Yountville, there's no one here, unless you grew up here, that would recognize Yountville. It was just complete. For starters, the highway ran through the middle of Yountville. The main street, that used to be 29. But it was rough. It was a rough town.
You used to be scared.
Did you have dances, like girls at high school? Dances. Dances at high school. Like what did you do with the opposite sex?
There's an opposite sex, that was years ago.
Did you have dances, like high school dances?
We had a lot of dances. That we had them after the game, after the football game, there would be dances. And Jerry talked about Mike Beltram. He had a band.
Yeah.
And then Steve Fillion had a band also. I don't think they were the same band.
No.
And they would play at the local dances, but there was a lot of them.
Yeah, you did sock hops. So you take your shoes off. When it was raining and you couldn't play outside, because they would have dances.
That was mostly at RLS.
Yeah. Because they didn't want us to tear up basketball.
Right. I know we had dances at the Presbyterian Church, or the
Presbyterian Church, yeah.
The Presbyterian Church?
After the football games.
Yeah. Episcopal Church, right. And
then
Native Sons Hall. They used to have the Kiwanis Capades at the.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
We always shook hands and went home separately. Any other questions? So last question. Mike, what was the most important thing growing up here in St. Helena that has helped you through your life?
I have a motto in elected office that I will never do anything that I don't want to see printed on the front page of the St. Louis Star.
Good way to go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. May I say one other thing? Okay, so you all know Shannon Coletto?
Hello.
Steve knows about this because we talked about it. He took me on a tour. But who remembers Eddie Benoit? Eddie Benoit. Eddie Benoit, for those of us probably in the room, we remember him as the guy that owned the Schwinn bicycle store in town. And when I was a kid, it was on Hunt Street next to Gigi's Bar. And I didn't know this until Shannon, but I'm a collector. I collect a bunch of different stuff. But one of the things I collect are Schwinn bicycles. And I tried to find some information about Eddie Benoit. And I found out, with Shannon's help, that he was more than just the bicycle guy. He was a real community leader. Matter of fact, there was an Eddie Benoit Day in St. Helena where he was recognized. He was the fire chief. He owned a car dealership. He owned a couple bicycle dealerships. And so I started looking into this a little bit. I talked to people like Petit D'Avazzini, who said that her dad and Eddie Benoit were good friends. And he used to own Grant's Garage, and Grant's Garage is where Steve's Hardware is now. And you used to be able to drive into Grant's Garage from either Main Street or Railroad. So there was two doors, you'd go in either way. And Petit said, oh yeah, I'd go down there, my dad and Eddie would visit, and I'd ride my bike from Railroad to Main, from Railroad to Main. And so we want to do a recognition of Eddie Benoit. We want to do here at the museum, and to highlight, not only was he the bike guy, but he was a community leader, and really, really helpful in the business community and the social network in the St. Helena area. And we want to bring bicycles into it. You do a helmet giveaway for kids, do a bicycle rodeo and all that. So I think we need to get that going.
That whole spirit of volunteerism that makes a community a community.
We have a volunteer fire department. And
50 years. When there were horse-drawn, we worked for the fire department when there were horse-drawn engines to in the 70s.
And we have his accounting system in the museum.
And Gigi's bar.
So it'll be a good St. Helena community spirit event.
Sounds good. Let's talk some more. Thank you all.
Thank you.